If Michael hadn't looked out the window at that exact moment, he might have lost his car forever. The sight made his breath hitch. A tow truck sitting in his driveway, its engine rumbling like a predator ready to strike. And standing beside it, a woman in a bright green tracksuit, her voice cutting through the air as she argued into her phone. Michael's stomach twisted. Something was very, very wrong. His gaze snapped to the car they were about to tow, his 1972 Chevrolet Chevelle. The same car he had spent years restoring, pouring in time, money, and sweat to bring it back to life. And now, a complete stranger was about to steal it. His pulse hammered. Was this some kind of mix-up? A mistake? But then, the woman turned, eyes sharp, smirk curling at the edge of her lips. Oh no, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Michael pushed open the door and stepped outside, heart pounding. What the hell do you think you're doing? And just like that, the battle began. Michael clenched his jaw, his patience wearing thin. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. This is my driveway. You have no right to tow anything from here. The woman in the green tracksuit barely reacted. She glanced at the tow truck driver, then back at Michael with a smug smile. Actually, I do, she said, crossing her arms. This driveway is shared property, and your rust bucket is violating HOA regulations. I've already reported it. Michael felt a slow burn rise in his chest. I don't belong to an HOA. The woman let out a dramatic sigh. Well, you should. We have standards in this neighborhood. She waved a hand toward his car like it was contaminating the area. And that thing doesn't meet them. The tow truck driver shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Look, lady, he said cautiously. Are you sure about this? I don't want any trouble. She turned on him with a sharp glare. I already called the HOA president. They approved it. Just do your job. Michael stepped closer, voice dropping. You touch that car, he said slowly, and you'll be dealing with more than just me. The driver hesitated, looking between them. Michael could tell he wasn't convinced. But Nancy, Michael had already started calling her that in his head, was standing her ground. You're overreacting, she said, waving him off. Just move the car before things get complicated. Michael let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. Complicated? You're the one bringing a tow truck to steal someone's car. Her expression flickered, just for a second. Then she straightened, tilting her chin up. It's not stealing if it's being removed for a violation. Michael clenched his fists. He had dealt with difficult people before, but this woman? She was on a whole different level. He turned to the tow truck driver. You know this is illegal, right? Towing a car without the owner's permission from private property? I could have you arrested for grand theft auto. The driver's face paled. Look, man, I don't want any part of this if it's not legit. He turned to the woman. You said this was an HOA order. You got proof. Nancy's confidence wavered, but she recovered quickly. I told you, I spoke to the HOA president. That should be enough. Michael folded his arms. It's not. For the first time, doubt crept into her expression. She looked at the tow truck driver, then back at Michael. Fine, she snapped. I'll get official confirmation. But this isn't over. She turned on her heel, stomping away toward the street. The tow truck driver, clearly relieved, muttered an apology before following her. Michael stood there, his heart still pounding as he watched them go. Something told him this wasn't the last time he'd be dealing with her. The next morning, Michael stepped outside, stretching as he prepared to start his day. But the moment he reached his front door, he froze. A piece of paper was taped to it. The bold letters at the top made his stomach tighten. Notice of violation. His eyes scanned the rest of the message. Immediate removal required. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Michael let out a breath, ripping the paper from the door. It looked official. The HOA logo was printed at the top, but something was off. No contact number, no signature, no specific details. Just a vague demand. His grip tightened around the paper. Nancy. He glanced toward the street, and sure enough, there she was, standing directly across from his house, arms folded, watching. She didn't even pretend to look away when he caught her. She just smirked. Michael let out a slow exhale, then crumpled the paper and tossed it aside. He wasn't playing her game. Or at least, that's what he thought. Because a few hours later, another notice appeared, this time, taped to his car's windshield. Same wording. Same fake HOA letterhead. Michael shook his head, torn between frustration and disbelief. He had never seen someone this desperate for control. That afternoon, he made a decision. He grabbed his toolbox and a security camera he had stored in his garage. If she was this bold, she wouldn't stop. He needed proof. By sunset, the camera was mounted above his garage, angled to catch every inch of his driveway. He tested it, making sure the motion detection worked. As he adjusted the settings on his phone, he glanced back at the street. Nancy was still there, still watching, still waiting. Michael tightened his jaw. Let her try. This time, she wouldn't get away with it. The next morning, Michael stepped outside and froze. Another notice was stuck to his windshield. This one wasn't just another warning. It was a fine. $500 for violation of HOA standards. Immediate payment required. Michael exhaled through his nose, pulling the paper off his car. Fake. Again. Same copied and pasted logo, same vague wording, and still no contact details. He turned his head, and just as expected, there she was, standing across the street, pretending to scroll on her phone. Michael smirked, shaking his head. She thinks this will scare me? He crumpled the paper and tossed it into his garage bin. But that was just the beginning. An hour later, a city inspector knocked on his door. Sir, we received a complaint that there's an abandoned vehicle on this property. The man said, clipboard in hand. Michael blinked. What? He stepped aside and gestured to the car. Does that look abandoned to you? The inspector raised an eyebrow as he scanned the spotless, well-maintained Chevelle. He sighed. Yeah, I figured. Just had to check. This isn't the first false report we've had in this area. Michael clenched his jaw. Let me guess. A woman in a green tracksuit. The inspector let out a small laugh. Didn't say who called, but wouldn't be surprised. Michael nodded, thanking him before shutting the door. His fists tightened. She was escalating, and she wasn't done. That night, just as Michael was settling in, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. Then another call. Blocked ID. Then another. Michael sighed, letting it go to voicemail. When he finally checked, a robotic voice said, "This is a final warning. Remove your vehicle, or further action will be taken." He deleted the message. Really? Nancy? A robocall? The next morning, his neighbor Tom stopped him on the way to his car. "Hey, man. Just a heads up, Nancy's been running her mouth about you," he said, shaking his head. "Telling people you're causing issues, breaking HOA rules, even saying your car is dropping oil everywhere." Michael let out a slow breath. "Of course she is." Tom patted his shoulder. "Don't worry. Nobody with a brain believes her. But she's not letting this go." Michael nodded. He had already figured that out. And as he glanced across the street and saw Nancy still watching him, he knew this was far from over. Late that night, Michael was jolted awake by a faint metallic scraping sound outside. He sat up, heart pounding, ears straining to pick up the noise again. There it was. A soft, deliberate scratching. His stomach sank. Someone was messing with his car. Without turning on any lights, he grabbed his phone and pulled up the security feed. The screen flickered for a second before the image came into focus. Nancy. She was hunched beside his Chevelle, her hand moving in slow, deliberate strokes along the driver's side door. Even in the grainy footage, he could make out the object in her grip, her keys. Michael's blood boiled. Without hesitation, he stormed out the front door. "Hey!" he barked. Nancy jumped back, her head snapping toward him, but she didn't run. Instead, she straightened, a sickly sweet smile creeping onto her face as she casually tucked her keys into her pocket. "Oh, Michael," she said, feigning surprise. "Did I wake you?" Michael's fists clenched at his sides. His voice was tight, controlled. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She sighed dramatically, tilting her head. "I was just checking your car," she said. "You know, making sure it's not leaking oil all over the driveway." His jaw tightened. "With your keys?" She placed a hand on her chest, eyes wide with mock innocence. "Are you accusing me of something?" Michael took a step closer. "I have you on camera. You're done, Nancy." For a split second, something flickered across her face, an emotion he hadn't seen before. Fear. But then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. She smirked. "So? What exactly are you going to do? Call the cops?" She let out a dry laugh. "Oh please, go ahead. I'd love to see them waste their time on this." Michael didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911 right in front of her. Nancy's smirk faltered. She took a step back, then another. "You're pathetic," she spat, before turning on her heel and stomping off into the night. 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Michael showed the officer the security footage, clear as day. Nancy keying his car, her smug expression as she did it. The cop let out a long breath. "Well," he said, shaking his head, "that's pretty damning." Michael crossed his arms. "So what happens now?" The officer sighed. "She wasn't caught in the act by us, so legally, we can't arrest her right now. But with this footage, you can press charges for vandalism." Michael nodded. "Do it." The officer jotted down notes. "She'll deny it. People like her always do. But with this evidence, she's in trouble." Michael exhaled. "Good." As the patrol car drove off, he glanced at the damage on his car. Deep, ugly scratches ran the length of the door. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't over. It was just getting started. The next morning, Michael sat at his desk, staring at the deep scratches running along the side of his car in the security footage. Nancy had gone too far. It was time to escalate things. He drafted an email to the HOA board, attaching the video, along with photos of the vandalism. Subject: urgent. HOA member vandalizing my property. To whom it may concern, I am writing to formally report an individual falsely claiming HOA authority. Attached is evidence of her vandalizing my vehicle. If the HOA does not take action immediately, I will be forced to pursue legal options. Kindly clarify whether she is acting on behalf of the HOA or on her own. Michael hit send and leaned back. Now, let's see what they have to say. Hours passed. No response. Then, in the evening, an email finally arrived. Dear Mr. Carter, thank you for your message. The board will review the matter and respond accordingly. That was it? Michael scowled. No mention of Nancy. No apology. Just a weak brush off. Fine. If they wanted to ignore this, he'd make them listen. The next morning, another paper appeared on his door. Final warning, $1,000 fine for repeated HOA violations. Failure to comply will result in further action. Michael let out a sharp laugh. She's really doubling down. He pulled out his phone, took a photo of the so-called fine, and drafted another email. Subject: fraudulent fines, legal notice. This is my final communication before legal action. I have confirmed that my property is not under HOA jurisdiction. The attached fine is both fraudulent and unenforceable. If I receive another notice, I will take this matter to the city and local news outlets. Michael sent the email and waited. That afternoon, his phone rang. Mr. Carter, this is Linda from the HOA board. We received your email. Can you clarify what exactly is happening? Michael clenched his jaw. Check your attachments. I sent you the proof. She's been harassing me for weeks, claiming she represents you. A long pause. Then Linda sighed. Nancy is not an HOA board member. She has no authority to fine anyone. Michael smirked. Then why am I getting letters with your logo? Another pause. We'll look into it. No, Michael cut in. You'll fix it. Today. Because if I receive one more fraudulent fine, I'm taking this to an attorney. Silence. Then, reluctantly, we'll handle it. Michael hung up. Nancy was about to have a very bad day. Michael was fast asleep when his phone buzzed, jolting him awake. His eyes flicked to the screen. Motion detected in the driveway. His stomach clenched. Not again. He grabbed his phone and pulled up the security feed. The night vision camera flickered, then focused. 3 figures stood near his car. One of them crouched by the fuel tank, a gasoline canister tilted in his hands. Michael's pulse spiked. They weren't here to scratch the paint this time. He flung the covers off, grabbed the baseball bat from the corner of his room, and stormed to the front door. Before stepping outside, he reached for the switch. The floodlights burst on. The driveway lit up like a stadium, casting long shadows across the pavement. The 3 figures froze, caught in the blinding glow. Michael recognized one of them immediately. Nancy. His voice cut through the night. What the hell do you think you're doing? The man with the gas can fumbled, spilling liquid onto the pavement. The other, holding a lighter, took a shaky step back. Nancy's expression twisted, but she didn't run. Instead, she lifted her chin and spat. You brought this on yourself. Michael's grip on the bat tightened. Are you insane? You were actually going to burn my car. She scoffed, but her confidence wavered. It's an eyesore. It doesn't belong here. Michael let out a bitter laugh. Neither do you. Then, from the distance, sirens. Nancy's face paled. The men beside her panicked. One bolted down the street, disappearing into the dark. The other hesitated, his head darting between Nancy and the incoming patrol cars. Michael didn't move. He didn't need to. The first cruiser skidded into the driveway. 2 officers jumped out, weapons drawn. Hands up. Get on the ground. The man dropped instantly, hands flat on the pavement. Nancy, however, stood frozen, her expression shifting from anger to pure disbelief. One officer yanked her arms behind her back, snapping handcuffs into place. She shrieked, "This is harassment. You can't do this. I was just..." "You were just committing arson." The officer cut her off. "We've got it all on tape." Nancy's head snapped toward Michael, rage burning in her eyes. "You set me up." Michael smirked. "No, Nancy. You did this to yourself." The officer turned to him. "Pressing charges." Michael folded his arms. "Oh, you bet I am." Nancy thrashed as they hauled her toward the squad car. "You'll regret this, Michael. You'll regret this." Michael watched as the door slammed shut behind her. He exhaled. Finally, it was over. The morning after Nancy's arrest, Michael stepped outside, expecting peace for the first time in weeks. Instead, he found a small crowd gathered near his driveway. Neighbors murmuring, pointing, discussing the night's events. A woman from down the street, Rebecca, approached him, shaking her head. "She's really gone." Michael smirked. "Yep, caught her red-handed." Tom, his next-door neighbor, let out a low whistle. "Never thought I'd see the day. She's been terrorizing this street for years." Michael crossed his arms. How the hell did she get away with it for so long? Rebecca sighed. "Because nobody fought back. We just figured it was easier to ignore her." Michael exhaled. That explained a lot. But it wasn't enough. That afternoon, he sent another email to the HOA board, attaching everything: the security footage, the fake fines, the vandalism report, and now, the police case file. Subject: immediate action required, HOA's involvement in fraudulent activity. Nancy Thompson has harassed multiple homeowners while falsely claiming HOA authority. If the board does not publicly disavow her actions and take corrective measures, I will escalate this issue to local media and the city council. Consider this your final warning. Michael expected them to drag their feet. Instead, within an hour, his phone rang. "Mr. Carter, this is Richard Lawson, president of the HOA board." Michael leaned back in his chair. "I assume you read my email." A pause. Then a sigh. "Yes, and we need to talk." An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled that evening. When Michael arrived at the community hall, the place was packed. Homeowners, families, even people who had never attended a meeting before, everyone was there. At the front, Richard stood with a few other board members, looking noticeably uncomfortable. When the room quieted, he cleared his throat. "We want to begin by acknowledging the situation regarding Miss Nancy Thompson," he said, voice tight. Michael leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Let's hear it." Richard continued, "We have reviewed the evidence and want to make it clear that Nancy Thompson was never an HOA board member. She acted entirely on her own." Murmurs rippled through the room. Another board member, Linda, hesitated before adding, "We also want to formally apologize to anyone who was unfairly targeted by her actions." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Not bad, but not enough." He stepped forward. "So what now?" Richard shifted on his feet. "Effective immediately, all fines issued under Nancy's influence will be rescinded. Any homeowner who paid money due to her fraudulent claims will be fully reimbursed." A few people gasped. Someone in the back clapped. Linda spoke up again. "Additionally, moving forward, no HOA fines will be valid unless they are issued directly by an elected board member with a signed statement." Michael nodded slowly. That was more like it. The neighborhood had let Nancy control them for too long. But not anymore. That night, for the first time in months, Michael slept soundly. A few days after the HOA meeting, Michael was in his garage, buffing out the scratches on his Chevelle when a delivery truck pulled into his driveway. A man stepped out, holding a large envelope. "Michael Carter." Michael wiped the grease off his hands and took it. "Yeah, that's me." The delivery guy nodded and left. Michael eyed the envelope suspiciously. The HOA's logo was stamped in the corner. "What now?" He tore it open and pulled out a letter. As his eyes scanned the page, his brows lifted. "As a formal acknowledgement of the hardship caused to you, the HOA is issuing a reimbursement for damages." Attached to the letter was a check for $10,000. Michael let out a short laugh, part disbelief, part satisfaction. They were really trying to make this go away. At the bottom of the letter, another note caught his attention. "Additionally, the board has voted to grant you an honorary exemption from all future HOA dues for the duration of your residency." Michael smirked. So, after all the harassment, after all the fake fines, now they were trying to keep him happy? He folded the letter and tucked the check into his pocket. This wasn't about money, it was about proving a point. And as for Nancy, her house was going up for auction. With legal fees stacking up and her being behind bars, she had no choice. The self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood had officially lost her throne. Michael glanced at his car, freshly polished, shining under the sunlight. It was over. And this time, for good. A week passed, and for the first time in months, the neighborhood felt peaceful. No more fake fines, no more threats, no more Nancy standing across the street, arms crossed like she ruled the place. Michael spent his afternoons restoring his Chevelle, carefully buffing out the damage Nancy had left behind. The deep scratches were gone, the paint was smooth again, and when he stepped back to admire his work, he let out a satisfied breath. Good as new. One evening, as he wiped his hands clean, his neighbor Tom strolled over with a grin. "You know," Tom said, leaning against the fence, "I don't think I've ever seen this street so relaxed." Michael smirked. Hard to be stressed when the neighborhood dictator is gone. Tom chuckled, cracking open a beer. "We're throwing a block party next weekend. You in?" Michael glanced around. People were out on their lawns, talking, laughing, something he hadn't seen in a long time. Families who once kept their heads down were now reclaiming their space. "Yeah," Michael said, nodding. "I'll be there." But just when he thought it was all behind him, one last reminder of Nancy arrived. A letter. stamped from the county jail. Michael sighed, already knowing what it would say. He ripped it open, his eyes scanning the messy handwriting. I hope you're happy. You ruined everything I built. That neighborhood was mine. You're a nobody. You'll always be a nobody. Michael let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Even now, she refused to accept she had lost. He crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash without another thought. That night, he slid into the driver's seat of his Chevelle. The engine rumbled to life, smooth and powerful. As he pulled out of the driveway, he saw Tom raising his beer in a mock toast. Michael smirked, gave a quick honk, then pressed his foot on the gas. As the car roared down the road, the city lights flickering ahead, he exhaled deeply. Nancy had tried to take everything from him, but in the end, she had only made him stronger. And as far as Michael was concerned, this was the sweetest victory of all. The end.